Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Sabih Ahmed. I'm the Associate Director and Curator at the Ishara Art Foundation. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the third day of transformation of our ongoing exhibition, Growing Like a Tree, Static in the Air. And this is the second iteration of our ongoing exhibition that opened in January this year and was titled Growing Like a Tree. The exhibition was curated by Sohrab Hura. And over the course of 6 months, this exhibition brought together a number of artists from various parts of South Asia and beyond in an exhibition which was about photography, image making practices, and also networks that form a field of image making in the present moment. Now, what has happened in the course of this year is that from the first iteration, we decided that this exhibition can't just be growing like a tree, it has to grow also like a forest, into a forest. And that's what led to the idea of continuing this show into its second iteration, but not just making it a second chapter of the show, a second part of the show, but rather expressing that kind of a growth, expressing this kind of an expansion. And this expansion happens in multiple directions, through multiple media. And how this has happened in Sohrab's curation is to take the form of a kind of 6-day transformation with curatorial intervention that Sohrab has choreographed each day. Much of the second iteration and its opening that takes place from the 11th to the 16th of September has been done remotely. Every night here at Ishara, this show slowly transforms, changes shapes, new clusters of artworks get added, volumes of certain works go up, certain works fade out. And that's really what has made up this exhibition from the very start. Works faded in, works started becoming clusters, growing in the exhibition. And we're delighted that this form kind of continues and even takes on a performative dimension. Today's tour is around the third day of transformation, as I mentioned. And if you followed our previous 2 days, you would have noticed some of the changes that have already taken some form here at the foundation. Now, what I'm going to do for this evening is quickly take you through some of the changes, give you a spatial orientation of what this exhibition is looking like today. And after that, we're going to have a conversation with some artists that we invited. We're joined by Sohrab himself, who's curated the exhibition, but also by 4 other artists, some who were there in the previous iteration, some who have joined in this new one. I will not introduce them in detail, but at least I'll share with you their names. We're joined by Kushal, whose photograph has just kind of trickled into the show. Then we've also joined by Bunu Dhungana, whose work from the previous iteration continues into the second. We're also joined by Katrin Koenning, who had done a video installation in the previous iteration, which yesterday split into 2 works and citations, and now her work faded away. And in place of that, today we have introduced a book project that she has done in collaboration with Sarkar Pratik. We're also joined by Sean Lee, an artist who is based in Singapore and whose work was presented in the first iteration. It was titled 2 People. What brings all of these artists together in today's conversation is a theme that Sohrab and I were interested in exploring with them, and that theme is intimacy. How do they work around intimacy or intimate relationships when they're making their work? And we'll go into that as we go into the conversation after the tour. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go behind the camera and take you through the show. So as you enter the exhibition, as you would also remember from the previous day's tours, a new cluster of works by Zainab came into the show. And in place of Jai Singh Nageswaram, whose works were present right over there, which is now moved up, one of the prints is moved up to the top left corner, becoming a notation for this work. Farah's work continues to be in the corner, pulling in sounds across the exhibition. Satish Kumar, Aishwarya Rumbakam, both of their works were present in the first iteration, and they continue to linger on in this time. What we have going on right now, and I hope some of you are able to hear the most recent intervention, is a work that has been inserted by the packet. Now, yesterday, we had made some subtle transformation in the show, which included 3 notations by them. The packet is a collective based in Sri Lanka, their practice really works around a circulation, a very vast and massive circulation of images that happens on the internet. And somehow they channelize those images into their work. You can find a lot of their interesting takes on memes, on GIFs, on all kinds of images and moving images that circulate on social media and the internet. But somehow it takes the form of installations and sculptures and prints in their art making practices. Here we have three notations, which we saw yesterday. And this was a premonition to a work that's been added today. And this work is called The Heavy Weight of Tiny Little Things. It's an Epson dot matrix printer that is sputtering out, if I may say, reams and reams of paper. The printer switches on and off every day with a stack of sheets behind coming out into this and kind of creating a mound in front of the work with the sheets of paper. If you go up close, you notice a whole bunch of images in very low resolution. But that's how dot matrix printers print. Now, one of the topics that Sohrab and I discussed when we were shaping this exhibition and as part of our initial conversation when I invited him was to think about the poor image, because there's a really famous essay by a philosopher and artist, Ito Stero, which was titled In Defense of the Poor Image. And she argues in that essay that as much as the world has been shaped by the institutional, high definition, authentic image, in the present moment, it is equally shaped by the poor image, the low resolution image, the poorly printed image, the GIF, the meme, the pixelated image. And these images are shaping the world as we speak. I think the Packet Collective's work here and those poor images coming out of the dot matrix printer bring and channelize some of that energy. In terms of formal kind of connections between these works, as Sohrab was thinking about installing and the placement of this work along with the packet, we were very aware of this red line that stretches on the wall as part of the Nepal Picture Library project. And this line somewhere, if you notice behind the iPad, the thread drops. That drop somewhere takes on the form of a graphite line that runs to Bunu, who is with us. That red line also somewhere travels into this photograph of Nida Mehboo's work. The reds continue into Bunu and into Sarkar Pratik. There are a lot of reds, hues, the red hues added to the exhibition because of Zainab, as you can see. So what is the printer doing? It's channelizing some of those lines and creating a new flow, a new circuit into the exhibition, which is fascinating because I won't say too much, but something is going to happen here where the red is going to get accentuated. And a small notation by the packet has been added to the corner, the heavyweight, tiny little things. I found the title particularly interesting because it's like talking about enormous objects in small little rooms, the heavy weight of tiny little things. The world is sometimes moving based on tiny little particles. The notation by Dainita Singh, sent a letter work. Sorry, I meant the citation continues to stay on. So in a way, we're actually seeing two objects occupying this space this time. The red thread that continued from the Nepal Picture Library into Nida Mehboo's print also somewhere figured into the work by Yu Mintan, a book that she had made. And today that book is not there, it has faded out. And we have a new book, which is collaboratively made by Katrin Koenning and Sarkar Pratik, both artists who were present in the previous iteration and continue in this. The book is titled Astray Noir. It's a gorgeous book of images taken by Pratik and Katrin. The heavy weight of tiny little things, tiny particles that are moving either in the form of sand or water or humidity, moving the planet. Those who are in Dubai, I hope you come and get to see the work. You use hand, on the other hand, that is looking at a spider. continues to stay on with Katrin and Sarkar Pratik's book. We go inside, and the work by Sarkar Pratik that served almost like a portal stays on, glowing into the space. And so does Munim Wasif's Khayal, which has been playing since iteration 1 and continues to play on into this iteration. But the Katrin Koenning video installation that was a double channel video on monitors has now, as I mentioned, become 2 different works, one by Rahi Punyashlok, who was with us in the conversation yesterday. It looks at an archaeology of old and new media, with lots of scratches and specks on a single image, and a strong sound component. You know, when you're setting up projectors, you always have to find the right luminosity, and one of the settings demands of you to lower or reduce the noise, apply a kind of noise reduction. This is a citation that has been inserted. We have 2 citations in the show now, one by Danita Singh and the second of Rux Media Collective, a new work that has come into this exhibition, where 2 hands, or well, sometimes it's 1 hand, but across multiple channels, inscribing onto a piece of paper with a calligraphic pen. And what you see is a whole multitude of figures that are invoked or conjured in this work. So if you remember when we started this exhibition, at the entrance, you could see inscriptions on the wall by Sohrab, and at the far end, on the very last corner of this exhibition, is another set of inscriptions by the Rux Media. The work is titled 31 Days. So on that note, I'm now going to end the tour, and we're going to have a conversation with the 4 artists who joined us, along with Sohrab. This is a brief kind of tour of the 3rd day of transformation. We'll keep doing these, but we're also capturing a lot of photographs. Let me also mention the work of Sean Lee that was once here in the form of a whole grid of photographic prints titled 2 People, where he captured his parents. This work has now been replaced by a single image. And this photograph is by Kushal. It is one photograph of a much larger series that we're going to see come into this exhibition over the course of the next 3 days. So while there's a densification of images, there are more images adding up. The exhibition is getting heavier. There's also some areas which are getting lighter, with just a single image, a high concentration. On that note, let me end the tour for today and we move to the conversation. So Raf, you want to take over?
Thank you for that, Sabih. That was actually really beautiful. I'm going to keep this short till Sabih reaches the office and takes over again. But as we mentioned in the earlier walkthroughs, that the clusters were extremely important for us in this exhibition in terms of the way we were shaping it. What's happening today is that, I think in the first iteration, we were very conscious by the end of it of a certain flow within the exhibition where Farah's work was drawing in stories from all different other parts of the exhibition and in a way channeling it in a direction towards the diagonally opposite corner where Nepal Picture Library is. And Nepal Picture Library had, through a lot of sifting of their own archives, extracted this one thread of stories, built on a timeline, talking about the lives of these 2 women who were part of the underground movement at a certain time. So there was a certain flow and a certain outlet on one hand, which was at Farah's corner, and a sort of an inlet. And I think a lot of our thoughts were forming not so much before the exhibition, but also during the exhibition. And we also realized that for us, the archive, which is actually a big part, it's I think in a way the spine of this exhibition, the idea of the archive, because it's not just this formal archive that I think many of us refer to, but also living archives of people in this exhibition who are building it. Whether it's Kushal, whether it's Bunu or Katrin, or Sean, all of them are actually building something that might, maybe after 30 years, 40 years, turn into a relationship that Nepal Picture Library has with those images. So what we have done in this transformation, at least for today, has also been to insert a sort of a transference of that valve, which we were identifying to be Nepal Picture Library, in terms of the archive not being this static, stationary repository of images, but more a sort of a channeling, a passing through, of information and images. And what the packet has brought in is not only a different kind of an archive, but also a sputtering that is happening in clash to the earlier flow in some ways. I think this clash was very important for us because we wanted to also disrupt the old iteration in some ways, to kind of also not let it settle anywhere. I think for me, the fear is someone making work is just this thought of my work or my ideas or myself sort of being settled and anchored in any one point. I think an anchor is very important, but in the end, I think drifting is also equally important. So the lowering and pulling back of the anchor is part of the process, and that for me is what's slowly starting to happen with the insertion of packet, where maybe the new notations which they've brought in, and maybe there might be some more notations coming up on the wall, or the leftovers, the residues of the earliest stories, whether it's my addressal or Nepal Picture Library archives. We are hoping for the force to kind of now reverse and to, in a way, sputter all of that out into, the pink reams of sheets that you all see right now. So apart from this, there's been a change in another cluster, which, a very important part of the cluster was this wall, this cutout of a wall, which was envisioned by Laura Metzler, who was a big integral part of this exhibition in the first iteration. And she had imagined the wall on which Ritu's work is placed, and behind which you have the book, to not just be a wall, but to be a sort of a projection of a cutout of the entrance, which is a square, and that's a magnification of it. I think in some ways we are thinking of enlargements, which is something of projections, an image not really being of one size, of one density, of one luminosity. And we also wanted the structure of the exhibition to play out in the same direction. And the triangulation of the wall was really important to us, because there was always a flow in to the second room, which was something a lot more metaphorical in some ways in the first iteration, because I think somehow the more lit room, where all the photographs were all about, I think the element of identity, representation at that time was quite strong in it. And the work from Bunu's, install kind of swung into this very, it swung into Khyal, which is what is going to be a further dialogue that will come in. There was also a kind of an outlet, away from that. And I think the triangulation was very important for us, because that space itself became very intimate, and somehow the works that fit in, whether it was Sean's work of his parents, just to, find an excuse to, in a way, nudge some amount of intimacy, between his parents by, placing them in front of the camera, how one behaves in front of the camera, how sometimes we can use the camera as a way to maybe, make people act out in a certain way, and what that leads to. That's something that was extremely precious in the show, because I think in the end, photography for many of us here is just an excuse to do something more. And there was the book by Yu that we talked about yesterday, and today there's a beautiful book by Katrin and Pratik. Unfortunately, Pratik can't be here with us today, and I'm going to hand over to Sabih because I always feel more comfortable to, not talk in an institutional way. So I'm going to stop here.
All right. Well, let's call everyone in then. Bunu, Kushal.
Yeah, I think Kushal
Sean,
has, there
Katrin.
might be some technical glitch because he seems to have disappeared.
Oh,
So
dear.
I don't know if he's in the waiting room or if there's a waiting room.
There's
or
no waiting room for panelists.
Okay.
All right. Well, I hope he logs back in. He was with us and a little while ago. But I think we should begin the conversation if that's okay. Yeah. Well, so today's conversation actually revolves around intimacy. And I know it's a very big area. So how do we kind of anchor it in this exhibition so that there's something productive that we can all engage with? But the reason that Sohrab and I thought about intimacy as one of the kind of thematics for the transformation and the tour today was because while one of the ways we've discussed this exhibition has been through clusters, and that cluster, as we discussed on day one, formed a very important conceptual kind of ground for this exhibition, because one has seen the long ongoing tradition of the single still photograph, that one photograph that was taken at the right time and the right place. And oddly enough, in this exhibition, every work is a cluster of images. And one wonders what's going on. What has shifted? What has changed? And what we came upon was that maybe something about the relationship between the still image, our relationship with time and our relationship with images itself has changed, where a single image is only what Sohrab described the other day as a temporary pause, because everything is in a continuous flow and images are also continuously moving. So if there is a single image you see, you're just seeing a pause, a brief pause. And what I took away from the conversation was that these clusters, in fact, signify a kind of trembling of the image. We're in a world where images are not static, they are constantly trembling, and in that trembling or oscillating, they kind of multiply. So that was one of the premise in, I think, a methodology when thinking about this, creating this exhibition. The other was flows, volumes, amplifications. But there was one other thing when thinking about clusters, when thinking about artists who were whose voices are brought together, and that was intimacy. That a lot of the works in this exhibition somehow explore very intimate relationships between the artists and someone they're close to. It could be family members, it could be friends, it could be people who they've made into a family. And as much as intimacy is about an intimate relationship with the other, it's also about having an intimate relationship with oneself. It's not easy to accept oneself. It's not easy to be truthful about oneself, be true to ourselves sometimes. And so we're going to touch on some of these things. And before I begin the Q&A with the artist, I wanted to add one other thing which seems to be relevant in the present context of lockdowns in many places, and also the pandemic that continues to stay with us, around us. And that is a beautiful formulation by these two architects and thinkers based in Mumbai. Their name is Rupali Gupte and Prasad Shetty. They are professors at the School of Environment and Architecture, the SEA in Mumbai, and they're practicing urbanists. Now, something that they said in a seminar a few months ago was that we're living in a time when the scales of intimacy are shifting. And I thought this was quite a beautiful formulation,
that one thinks of proximity and distance based on physicality, that someone is far away, someone is near, someone is accessible, someone is inaccessible. But there are also other ways of forging and forming intimacy. Someone is close to you who you've not been in touch with for many months. Someone is distant from you, even though you're living together with them. You're locked into homes, and now you're suddenly cast into a very intimate environment. And sometimes that intimacy becomes unbearable. So this intimacy is not a sentimental intimacy of just, let's talk about who we're close to, but also the difficulty of being in intimate environments. Artworks, some of them in this exhibition, also created a very intimate relationship between the viewer and the artwork. Sometimes those stories in those artworks pulled you in almost to have a kind of affinity with the stranger, with someone you never even knew. So we hope we're going to be able to capture some of this in the artists that we are joined with. And as I mentioned, you can read their bios on the Shara website. Sean is the artist I wanted to ask the first question to. In the previous iteration, Sean's work titled Two People was presented, and this was a set of photographs that he was taking with his parents. And I know it might sound sometimes easy to take pictures of one's parents if one's doing it, in a casual kind of fun and intimate way. But then when you start doing this seriously, obviously someone you're close to, it's hard to depict them in ways they don't want to be seen. Or you might want to represent them in ways that you feel is more truthful, and they don't like that. So that intimate relationship with the family and starting a beautiful series, which has gone for over a decade, is something I wanted to actually ask you about, Sean, which is, how did this begin? And over time, this project, I believe, still goes on, right?
Yes.
So how has it changed? So maybe you can take us through how Two People began. And I'm going to share a few images on the screen for those who have not seen it.
Okay, so I'm going to tell you the story of how this work began. This work began actually in 2010, but I had the idea to do this work in 2009. In 2009, I had a really nice exhibition of my previous work called Shauna in France. And when I was there, I was very excited and very happy to be in Europe and to feel like I'm somebody, having a nice show as a much younger person. But I also felt that the Shauna was a failed work, and I've known for quite a while, even when I was making the work, that it was a failed work. And I was constantly thinking to myself, I wonder what kind of work is meant for me. So in France, I received a message from my father, and that has never happened before. Basically, he's like a kind of very aloof kind of person, he doesn't spend much time with us, but he texted me and said that, you should keep up with this photography thing. And then I thought to myself, perhaps when I go back home from France, I will photograph my parents, because it is something that is a part of my life. I mean, nobody can choose their parents. There are people that occur to you like without your own choosing, and in a way, I am a continuation of them, and they are a part of me. So when I went back to Singapore, I decided to photograph them, but I didn't want to just photograph their daily life at home, because their daily lives are, I guess maybe there are other people's parents have more interesting lives, but my parents have very boring lives at home. Nothing happens, and it doesn't. When I try to make some pictures of just life in general, it doesn't feel like anything. I wasn't very excited. I decided that I'm going to get them to pose for me and for the camera. I wanted to make them be very close to each other, to touch each other, to have contact with each other. And a big part of the reason is because they don't really have a physical relationship. They are cordial. They do have conversations, but they're never in the same space. They're never close to each other physically. Even in the house, they don't sleep in the same place. There's always a big space between them at home. So I decided to get them to perform for the camera. And it happened so easily that I was surprised. And then, I had a lot of questions, but I just kept them to myself. One of the things that I was thinking about was, if it was so easy, why don't you do it sooner, or like do it more often? Just why is there always this space between the two of you? After doing this work for so long, it's been a decade, I start to feel that actually it is okay, because if I photograph them for long enough, then when I photograph them, they do become very close to each other. And so I can create another world where they have a lot of contact. And that world that I create is also part of the real world. It's just that they do it for the pictures. But doing it for the pictures and doing it in real life is not so different if you do a work for a really long time. Do you know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
Yes.
I feel that it's okay, because in the pictures they can come together very easily, and they have they're not opposed to it, and they look pretty good together. So I think making pictures is a way for me to create a little world that is a little bit different from the real world that I live in. And maybe in some ways, it does have some small little impact in their real lives as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. I'm going to come back to you, but let's move to Kushal, because Kushal, you too have worked on a series that began all the way back in 1990. And this is a series called Intimacies, again, capturing a kind of lived reality in a family, the Chatterjee family, if I'm not wrong. And
yes,
I wanted to request if you could speak a little bit about how this began and how did it unfold over such a long period of time?
actually, I started it in 1998, and before that, I used to do street photography. But it was not that I didn't take their photographs, but I took their photographs in fits and starts. But after during that time in Indian photography, the changes were surfacing. I saw some very interesting work from Dayanita Singh and others, and I decided to look for a subject. So the subject is very important. I heard from John Badger, the writer. So I decided to decided to start this project. It's a long project for say 10 years or 12 years. And during this long journey, I have seen many things that I recorded there. Finally the disintegration of the family and their deaths and the intimacies also. And it became a part of my life. It is an autobiographical work, you can say. Though I don't belong to the family, but it was part of my life. So I started, and the family had 10 members. The youngest member you can see is Tista, standing with a doll, and you can see Manju Chatterjee, the protagonist of my work. And she helped me a lot in completing the project. I mean, she collaborated with me, and all other members, they accepted me, because for a long time taking photographs is sometimes becomes very boring. Then I heard the words from Cartier-Bresson. He said, everything is interesting, everything is new. Looking at something is as if you are looking at it for the first time. So when I started it in 1998, and every day I try to see something new, and I finally found the new in the old. So I was so excited, and the work kept on rolling. So this is the way I kept on taking photographs, and I also did some other work, like in Ladakh, where I fell sick, and finally, it was a serious illness, and I shifted from my house to their house, where I stayed for another 4.5 years, and kept on taking photographs. And the later part of my work is when Manju Chatterjee was detected with cancer. Then the things began to sadden me, and so that part was very difficult for me to photograph, but I still kept on shooting, keeping in mind that through photography I want to keep her alive. So I kept shooting. Finally, she died in 2009, and I closed my project. This is the story. Actually, I wanted to make it a photo novel, because my father was a novelist, and I'm fond of novels. So I tried to follow the life chronologically, so that I can bring out a novel kind of, you can say, photo novel, novel kind of things. So I tried my best to do that. I read some very great books like Thomas Mann's Brood and Brook, and it gave me the idea of how a family evolved. So I got inspiration from that. I also liked that book, The Family Matters, by Harrington Mistry. It also, gave me some inspiration to build up stories in such a way that the final shape will be a photo novel. So that is the idea of my work.
Thank you, Kushal. Kushal, we'll come back to you as well. We'll just do a full circle with everyone present, and then I think we'll go into more depth. Katrin, can I come to you? We shift registers in the kinds of intimacies that we're talking about, one that are familial, to working collaboratively with friends. And in the work we have presented currently, Astre Noir, where you and Pratik have collaboratively worked to create this book, could you tell us a little bit about the book, as well as about how this collaboration even started?
Well, I think that's actually a really magical thing, how that all happened, and the fact that that even happened, because the way that, and I guess I have to sort of roll it right back to maybe, I think it was, pretty sure it was 2014, maybe 13, but pretty sure it was 14. And Pratik and I didn't know each other, but had sort of maybe written, you know, through the thin ether to each other a couple of times, because I think there was something that resonated with both of us in each other somehow, and in our works, which we'd sort of been seeing floating by each other, I guess. And then it so happened that we both happened to be going to this small sort of German photo festival in Dortmund, which is actually a city sort of in the pot, which is where I'm from. So it's really right next door to where I'm from, and even that was quite incredible, actually. And so that's sort of where we met. And we spent a week there together with everybody else at this festival, and grew really close really quickly. And so from this grew this really deep friendship very quickly. And I guess at that time as well, we were both, because I think both of us have maybe as a kind of general practice, you know, we work in like long form projects and might deal with, I don't know, you know, sometimes maybe bigger ideas or something as well. And I think certainly for me, it was at a point in time as well where I was sort of getting really curious about, I joined Instagram, which sounds really stupid to say because it's just not, you know, but it's important to this work because that's what happened. And I think it was sort of like that for both of us. And I think both of us equally at the same time had kind of started just sort of using this, I guess, medium of our time to sort of just play around with, and you know, obviously upload pictures to Instagram, and for me it was really just kind of like a play space, and it sort of offered this beautiful counterpoint to my other practice. And in a sense, visually, I feel like as well is this work is really quite different to my greater practice, I guess. And part of that counterpoint, I think, was that was this sort of idea of play and this kind of, I think for both of us with this work as well, or with these, or just actually, I would say making these pictures, I don't think there was a kind of hierarchy of subject matter, and I don't think that neither of us intended to kind of, make it about something very complex or grand. It was really sort of a joyous kind of discovering of what this little thing could do, I guess, and how far you could push it, I guess, as well. I mean, back then it was whatever, like that you know, iPhone 4 or something, so it was kind of crappy quality, and you could literally, if you pointed it at light was reflecting onto a surface, which is what most of these pictures actually are. I get asked often, are they, you know, did you carry a flash or did you have a torch or something? But it's literally light reflecting off a surface, and you sort of position the old iPhone to it, and it just sort of freaks out, of course, and it sort of falls in on itself, you know. And so it was a play space somehow, I think, for both of us. And through us meeting, and then, you know, of course, going back to our respective corners of the world and being in close contact, and you know, there was, I think that's kind of where, and I think in this sense, it's so interesting when I think about this as a kind of collaborative project, because I wouldn't actually say that it's a collaborative project in the sort of more known or expected way, in that we were sort of sending things back and forth to each other. That's sort of not what happened. It was more that we were both, we grew incredibly close, and we were both sort of just making this these pictures in our respective corners of the world. And I'm absolutely certain, and this is where I feel like it fits so beautifully into this exhibition as well, in the sense of, I don't know, a lot of dialogue, maybe cross dialogue between artists and sort of these, these connections, these interconnections. I think a lot of them are sort of unspoken as well, right? So they're not always this kind of outspoken, prepared, sort of linear thing, but they're just kind of, they're fluid, I guess. And I think this is very much how this is a collaboration in that sense as well. That we were certainly, I think, and maybe it sounds weird to say, but in a kind of spirit way, maybe, feeling each other and with these pictures too, across time and space, I guess, without necessarily sending anything back and forth between each other, ourselves, I mean. And what was amazing was that Shaw's Commune, who, I've been admiring for lots of years, they make amazing books, of course, and they sort of contacted us and they just went, do you want to make a book? We see this incredible dialogue somehow. We see like your work really is dialogical with each other, and we could imagine that would make an absolutely amazing book. And so that's really how that came about, I guess. And I think the work itself, Sabih, I really loved earlier when you sort of said that the book is to you a kind of heavyweight of tiny particles. I love that a lot, because I guess that's really kind of what it is, but also very much, and maybe in the context of intimacy as well, as an extension to the intimacy between Pratik and I being this book, that maybe it's a kind of, and sort of irrelevant to what it was made with, these pictures, a kind of way of, a kind of intimate relationship to the world through the photograph, in that, might be to do with sort of re-seeing familial things, or sort of re-seeing the already seen, and by that kind of, and making a picture sort of almost maybe elevating it back to something that that is of significance, in fact. And maybe I don't know, this kind of, I think, engagement with something already seen or already known, or vernacular, I guess, in as an act of intimacy as well, I think. And for me, certainly always with all my projects as well, a kind of the act of the photo as a way to draw closer to something. And that could be, the dust on my staircase, or it could be the tree down the road, or my neighbor, or my mum, but always trying to draw closer to something, I think.
Thank you. Thank you, Katrin. I'm going to pause the share screen. Thank you. That was very beautiful. All three of you. Now, it's also interesting how in all the three artists and the works that you've shared, you can see different, how do I say, different, not technologies, because that just sounds too cold, but rather different objects that are mediating relationships, or different communication tools, if I can say. On the one hand, with Sean and Kushal, there's the camera, and in the case of Katrin and Pratik, there's the iPhone or the mobile phone, and you can see how these scales of intimacies change with the change of technologies also. Because if you think about it, the way long distance relationships now come together are so different from the way they would have been, say, 3 or 4 decades ago. I mean, it's not as if there were no long distance relationships then also. People coming to the Gulf, for instance, have families elsewhere, and they're in a long distance marriage sometimes. But clearly, long distance friendships, long distance intimacies are reshaped now, and a whole project can emerge, which, I mean, yesterday I think I was corrected that not to call everything a project. So I had to find another word for it. But yeah, you can see the scales, the techniques in which intimacies are kind of forged. But I mean, what I want to come back to all three of you is what you've shared is actually something that a form of intimacy that is very amicable. But one always knows, I mean, I have my own resistance towards my parents, They would have it towards each other. One has it towards one's best friends. There are disagreements. In fact, that's what makes a relationship sometimes stronger, to be transparent about differences. And I would want to ask the three of you later on about that dimension of the intimacy, and not just the beautiful bond that is shared only in terms of love and care, but also a different kind of love and care, which is, to be honest, sometimes at the risk of being sounding hurtful even, or finding resistance. But before we come to that, I want to come to Bunu and the project that she's shared at I'm saying project again, the work that she's shared in Growing Like a Tree, and now as it's moved into Static in the Air, is called Confrontations. And to me, it also, I think there's a great clarity in the work. I'll just share a few images, if that's okay. There's this amazing clarity of an understanding about oneself in this series called Confrontations. And I say clarity because one of the things that I find especially compelling with this series is that, you know, while works like these have been seen sometimes among practitioners, you know, someone standing frontally, facing the camera, confronting the camera as well. There's an insistence that you have in doing that still. An insistence which to me suggests that the work has not been done until the issue has not been resolved. So if there is a question that is bothering me and someone has dealt with that question in a similar way before, I don't care. I'm still going to have to make that image. I'm still going to have to make a work like that. And so it kind of, to me, suggests a form of an intimate understanding of oneself. It's not just intimacy towards another, but towards one's own self. And without going too vague on this subject, let me just ask with how this series even began. And the specific question that I have is that how did you end up deciding that the series is going to be self-portraits and not a portrait of someone else depicted in this way?
Yeah, thank you. Because a lot of this discussion has been around collaboration. I think before I made this series, I had collaborated with other body of work. She was a widow, and so that was actually the first time I was thinking in terms of color, what it means in a specific Hindu society. And even though it was a collaborative work, I thought I was more, I think I was trying to say something rather than telling something that she wants to say. So so that was one part before I did this. But there was other self-portrait series that I was sort of trying to make, but I just didn't know what I was trying to say. So this work came about because I realized that there were so many things I wanted to say, and I couldn't. I'm not such a great writer, but somehow I think with visuals, I feel I can say more, or I can say what I want. And I realized how I'd just been running away from my home, and everything around here made me very suffocated. Being in Kathmandu or in Nepal, as a woman of a particular age, married, and always sort of, and even as a child, like, you know, you're a girl, so you have to behave in a certain manner, you have to sit in a certain manner, you have to eat in a certain manner. So all these things would always bother me even then, but as I grew older, it just became much more prominent. So so all this was happening, and in the meantime I was also thinking about the color, and then I thought, why don't I use the color that is red, which is very quite prominent in Hindu women's life. So I thought I'll start sort of experimenting and seeing like what happens, if I try to play around it in a way. So I think it was just because also I was this was not something I had done before, and I had no sort of expectations. So I was more unafraid, I believe, to just do it. And yeah, so it's here.
But the question about deciding to do self-portraits and not have someone else.
Yes, so that's what, because I felt these were things particular to my experiences, and when I was trying to do it with someone, I thought I was putting sort of my story, for lack of a better word, on someone else. So I might as well be the
protagonist or the exactly.
I don't know if that's the word, but yeah.
Got it. Understood. So now let me come to you while we're at it. Let's circle you in. And I know that, I mean, having worked with you over now, it's been over a year now, one can see that so much of your work is shaped around relationships, relationships at home with immediate family, but a lot of relationships that you share with all of the artists here and many of the people in this show and beyond. And it seems like you're constantly in conversation with them, you're constantly in dialogue with them. And I want to know like, what instigates this? What triggers this? Are you reaching out to them? Are they reaching out to you? Because you're not collaborating with all of them. You're just, you're working, they're working, but I see that you're constantly on messages with someone, you're on emails with another person, and you're involved with many people's works, as much as they might be with yours. How do you describe this? What's going on?
I think it's just a survival mechanism, in the end, I think that, for example, if someone has just begun, for me, it's not really me helping them out, but more me trying to understand. They become mediums of some sort, where for me, I'm also able to, I think, be in touch with the pulse of, what is making them feel vulnerable in today's world, because I also feel that like I'm getting more from them rather than me giving something, and in a way, I don't know, I think the world is changing so fast, and I feel like maybe at a time when I began, it was I feel I was taking many more risks at that time, like, for example, the way Bunu just described, saying that I just thought I would do it, and I feel that the more work I did, somehow there was less space for me to consider it so easily. I would just do it. And in a way, I think vicariously, it becomes a way for me to also just be in touch with what people are risking themselves, because I think that everyone around actually has, they have a lot to say, and I'm interested in that part, not necessarily what they make out of it, but in some ways in the conversation, if something comes out, then I'm very happy, that something has come out. But I think that throughout, I think when I started working, I'm self-taught, and I would say that I grew up with many insecurities of, you feel like it's a competitive space and so on. And at some point, I guess I felt like I didn't have to really worry so much about sharing a space with someone, but in fact, that could be something, if I could think about the long run, I think for me, the sharing that space with someone was something which would be more nurturing for my own work, you know. So it was as simple as those insecurities of, when you begin with it, you're applying for the same grants, someone else gets it, and you're like, why the hell did that person get? You didn't get it. And this is like back in 2007, 2008. I think that these were the sort of, because it's also to do with, I think, the expectations of a certain system, which is always trying to look for the next new sort of thing, and and then people are spat out. So in a way, like, I feel people don't really have that much of a value beyond fitting into certain agendas and so on. And I think that for me, it's the horizon, right? The further you look, you realize that the landscape is actually much bigger, and there are many more other people there. And in a way, I think you can ask someone the way, to reach further in that sense. So it was just that,
Thank you. Actually, this brings me to not just mediums that tie people together, but also sites. It seems with this exhibition, I discovered a whole bunch of places where all of these lines of different artists' journeys seem to intersect. While Ishara seems to be one of them at the moment, one such site has been Angkor, the Angkor Photo Fest. Another has been the Chobi Mela. More recently, it's also been Photo Kathmandu. So there are a number of sites where I suppose at least 3 or 4 of you and many others from this exhibition have met over time. One of the stories shared in the exhibition, inscribed in the wall by Sohrab, was that he met Sean for the first time in 2007 in Cambodia, where that's where this story was shared about how the site of family was the starting point of a lot of your photography. So do you want, sorry, Sohrab, are you going to come in with something?
No, sorry. So, I mean, Sean, you started photographing your parents in 2007. I think that you were already, I think because it's something that always stayed with me, because you were talking about this element of touching. I want to use photography to just touch. And even at that time, I remember you were photographing your family. I remember that you were, in a way, it was drawn from a certain other history of art making, where you were looking at Whistler's portrait of his mother and you were trying to create that. But I felt like, you were already looking at the family, your own family, which is a difficult space, both what I think Sean and Kushal have sort of been existing in. Because I think yesterday you were asking about abstractness. And I think in a way, the abstract is the unfamiliar. And I think the familiar space can be a very difficult space at times. And I saw Sean kind of dealing with that space. And at that time was what, 1920? We were roommates, in fact. And I also saw the work Shauna kind of arise, or the character Shauna, which was beautiful. And then obviously Sean started going to church, and Shauna died along with his church going. And then there was this other sort of work that came up. So there are these other backstories, but I think that in a way, I was also trying, like, photographing my mother at that time. So there was this instant bond in terms of, maybe that empathy, that you realize that someone was negotiating a similar difficult sort of space in whatever way. In case of Sean's case, if he was aware. And in fact, I remember what had struck me was that for 20 years or something, Sean hadn't stepped out of Singapore, which is, I think, smaller than Delhi maybe, or as big. And Sean told me that was the first time he had traveled outside Singapore. So when you think about, this thing of Katrin and Pratik kind of in a way having this conversation from, so far away, which is, and then you're talking about Dubai and these other sort of linkages. In some ways, I feel quite lucky and privileged that I got to see Sean's also location and sites kind of opening up, and
It's okay. No, but this is beautiful, and one can see that these sites where intimacies are shared seem to proliferate all along in so many places. And what's emerged from yesterday's conversation and today's is that there's a strong generational kind of frame that seems to be developing in my head with this exhibition, because we had Jai Singh talk about his grandmother. We had someone else also talk about their grandparents yesterday. We had two people talking about their grandparents. We have people talking about their loved ones, their parents, their relationship with their mother. And it's in my head producing a very interesting shift in the way one might think of family photography or family photographs today. Because again, we were talking about the single image, or the image that best represents the way one would like to show a family, but it's surrounded by a milieu of other ways one relates to their loved ones. And a work I've been recently spending time with, which is not about families, but how in a way solidarities create a sense of family sometimes, is a work by Shiba Chachi. And she created this work between 1980 and 1991 called 7 Lives and a Dream. Let me share it with everyone if you don't mind. She's not in the exhibition, by the way, but I'm just sharing it because it's a very powerful work. And these photographs were taken by Shiba Chachi between 1980 and 1991 during the peak of the feminist movements in India. There were the autonomous women's movement. There were various organizations that were also mobilizing women. And these demonstrations, these protests were happening after increasing number of murders were taking place in families on the basis of dowry, or just basically either infanticide, female infanticide, dowry killings, or cases of rape and murders. So just the fact that there was just so much of that all around in various parts of India, thousands of women got together from urban and rural contexts protesting. And the work that Shiba created in that period was later called 7 Lives in a Dream, where she takes the portraits of 7 key protagonists in this. And each of them were either activists or very important voices. But what she does in this project, which this website doesn't capture, is that every life and a dream is surrounded by a multitude. And I think there's something, that's Shiva Chachi, and there's something really powerful about thinking of portraits by way of showing multitudes. How can photography capture the singular within an ocean of other voices that actually bring you together, that are on the one hand singular themselves, but also create a force that is in unison? And something I think that I sense when I'm talking to all of you is the sense of a solidarity to create portraits, to sort of reflect on various very intimate and personal relationships that cannot be captured through just portraits, but in fact multitudes. Those multitudes also invoke particles sometimes. Yeah. So, but on that note, what I wanted to bring up was something I raised already, which is that these are not easy spaces, even though one is living with one's parents, one is living with one's loved ones, one is working with one's friends. They're actually difficult spaces. Sometimes the differences are almost non-negotiable. You can't negotiate them because those are terms that will completely break the relationship you share. You can't talk about certain things with parents because if you do, it just creates a very awkward situation. So I wanted to ask each of you about that side of your project. And why I bring that up is because I don't also want to make the family this haloed space of everything good, because we can see where that goes, at least in nationalist right-wing sort of rhetoric, the nation is spoken about as a family. In Western civilizational discourse, there was a term called the family of man. And we know what that familial kind of narrative creates. It creates all kinds of exclusions. The Family of Man, this title, which was of an exhibition in the MoMA in the 1950s that traveled in 60 different destinations around the world, was talking about all humanity is one large family. And we know how problematic that is. Who's the daddy? Who's the father here? Who's going to dictate the rules? And I mean, I'm just being frivolous in this, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that there are all kinds of power dynamics that can be extremely asymmetrical. And so in fact, and that's what sort of leads to when you have motherland coming up, the land or your country become feminine mother kind of symbols, which then real mothers have to start fulfilling those kind of duties, that I'm doing this, I'm bearing children for the country or something. No, I'm not. So, so about that side of the family, let's not revere family as just a space which is one of just trust and necessarily kind of romantic kind of togetherness, but in fact a space of difference too. And how did differences shape in to the project? How did you negotiate those, Sean?
Hi. I mean, there are no. I mean, like you said, there are no perfect families, and there are some things that you cannot resolve, some things that cannot be resolved, and people have differences, and people have their egos, and they have strange habits. But at least for me, I feel that when I get them to come in front of the camera to perform, I can see that I am creating a space where I can kind of create the rules. And so I can make a bubble with my camera. And then I feel that this is like a very magical thing, because I didn't expect that they would take to it so easily, and that they would be so open to being photographed. Sometimes I wonder if they really know what is happening. But I like to think that when I get them to come together, they do feel something that they cannot really describe. I try to ensure that the sessions are kept very short, so I already know what I want to do and I get them to come and do it. And the reason why I keep these sessions very short is because I don't ever want them to feel like I am a bother, so that they would continue to be agreeable to be photographed. So over time, I start to see whether I can encroach into, to let my photography encroach into the real world. They allowed me to paint the walls of my home gray. And I was very surprised that I could do that they didn't really have anything to say when I decided to paint some of these walls gray. And the reason I did that was because I thought that it would look better in my pictures. But when I paint the walls gray, I had this thought that, oh, you know, the photograph world is coming into the real world. Now they allow me to make some changes to the home, but there are lasting changes to the home. But of course, the work that I do with my parents is not just, over time, things change, you know, it's not just about them coming together. Sometimes I photograph them just by themselves. And then sometimes I photograph them, they are not inside the pictures, I just photograph their things. Sometimes I make marks on their bodies and I photograph those marks that I leave behind on their body. So in some of these pictures, you can see that sometimes I look at them over time and I see that no matter what you go through when you are younger as a married couple, no matter what kind of animosity they might have, aging does something to, like, time is a great leveler of things, and because human beings age and get closer and closer to the day that they die, there are endless opportunities for you to stop being a dick. And there are endless opportunities for you to learn to live with the other person. Because when you get older and you get more and more frail and you see that your skin is changing, just like the furniture in your house is changing, you know. Some of the furniture in my house, they are so old, the leather, they look like human skin. And you start to get a sense that, hey, you know, my time here is rather limited. And the most constant, the person that has been the most constant in my life is my wife. Perhaps it's not a bad idea to at least live peaceably, you know. And I can see that happening over time, not just through my pictures, but also through the way that they are with each other. And then at a certain moment in their lives, what occurs is that suddenly they become grandparents. And now all over again, they have to take care of very young children. Because we are all, me and my siblings, we are all grown up. But my sister has 2 children and two kids, and they take care of these kids when my sister has to go to work. So they are with these 2 children, young toddlers, every day. And then sometimes I look at them with these young babies and I think to myself, they are doing the same thing all over again. But now they have a chance to be more collaborative, because you are so old that you cannot work. At least for my dad, you cannot work, you're so old. And then in the house, all the children have moved out. I've moved out, my sisters have moved out. And then you are there, 2 person in a home during a time of COVID with 2 little babies. You have to learn to live together and deal with this situation together. If not, you will go crazy. And so now they have a chance to bring up 2 young children, but in a way that they have never done before. So my dad now is doing a lot of cooking. He cooks every day. But for 20, 30 years, he was almost always never home until at night. So my mom is doing all the housework. But now my mom has to take care of these little toddlers and my dad is doing the housework and the cooking. And so this is karma. Now he knows what it's like to be a housewife, you know. So time is of course, there's, in every family, there's some pain, there's some unhappiness, there's some unpleasantness, and some judgments that you form about each person. But because human beings inevitably die and time is always passing and you are always getting older, life is constantly offering you some opportunities to be more tolerant and be more pleasant and live peaceably. Because what they also realize is that if they do not live peaceably with one another, they will only create more pain for themselves.
Thank you, Sean. I'm going to interrupt only for the reason that I think today we're really feeling that time is limited. We have literally 10 minutes left. And now we have to have this question answered by 3 more people, at least quickly. But while Kushal, you can talk a little bit about how does one deal with difference in especially the work that you were doing around intimacies. I also want to open floor to anyone attending today. If they want to ask any questions, please write them in the chat or in the Q&A and we can relay them to our speakers. Kushal, I'm sorry, I'm going to request if you can make it brief because, I mean, as much as we will still extend a little bit, but it'd be nice to hear from, the others too.
Actually, you know, this the family was a joint family. So I had to deal with 10 people and sometimes more. because they have close relatives. They used to come. So I have to be very careful. And also, you know, I was a lonely person. I wanted to belong. So that kind of thing is there. So I try to help them out in all matters. For instance, Tista, the youngest member of the family, I taught her how to draw. I taught her how to sing. I taught her how to write English in short sentences. And also, there were older people, and whenever it demanded, I went to call doctors or went to buy medicines. This kind of, this collaboration I had. They also did many things for me. They, when I was sick, I stayed over there and recovered. But still, there were occasional acrimonies. So during that time, I had to intercede because I had that position and try to make peace with people who are not for each other. So this kind of way, I try to keep the family together.
Understood.
That's it.
Understood. Thank you. Thank you. It's also very interesting to see that in Sean's case, there's a constant posing of the family. There's a demand to kind of come together in a choreographed environment. Sean is choreographing a lot of the environment, whereas in Kushal, it's really being immersed in it so fully and then seeing what moment can get captured. Katrin, moments of difference in the intimacy. And if I may, I want to also just bring up a question that has been raised by Virangana, who says, I'll just read out the question, that thank you for such a beautiful conversation. My question to the panel is an extension of Sabih's question. While there's this tenderness and the intimacy of your works, there's also this undercurrent of resistance that you're transforming through your work. Does this realization of performing or visualizing this resistance allow you to let go of the resistance in some way, or what does it do for you? So the question of resistance, the question of difference in these tender intimacies. Since we've just heard Sean and Kushal, maybe Katrin, you could come in.
I'm stuck. I don't know about, like, when I think about that particular work or those images in the book of Projects in Mind, I haven't ever given this idea of differences a thought in relation to that. I don't think somehow. More maybe kind of rather the opposite, actually. More, kind of things that that we share, or that we that sort of connect us together, or that we both might be drawn to, like a love thing, to certain things that we might tend our eyes to or something. But yeah, so I feel a bit stuck. I don't know about differences, actually.
Bunu, do you want to say something about difference? Because your work is titled Confrontations. There's a certain, like, there's a very definite marking out of a difference in your position to the expectations all around you. In fact, your work is quite frontally about difference. Is this something you're conscious of?
I don't know.
Has there been a confrontation back, perhaps?
I didn't think of it as differences. So, you know, when I was I was doing it, I was more inclined towards thinking what are the things that really like annoys me or angers me in a way that society sort of expects in relation to patriarchy, especially. But I also work in my work. I'm trying to work with my mother as well. So, you know, because the difference is because she comes from a certain generation and I come from the other, and this sort of constant conflict that we keep having, you know, the expectations of each other, more so for her as a mother. I think that is where I can think of differences in the sense of the word.
May I ask what has been the response to confrontations from, say, your friends or family?
Well, my mother had come to see the exhibition, and it was quite difficult for her, I think, you know, for the society like we live in, where we are constantly worried about other people's opinion, you know, and there I was just sort of putting myself and even her part of her there. So I think she was a bit uncomfortable, but I think there was that space for me to express, which I think she respected that the fact that I, you know, I was expressing, or my friends, they were really my childhood friends had also come, and they were like, these were the things you would tell us, and now you are telling it to the world. So I guess
Amazing.
that was what they said to me.
Wow, beautiful. But we have just a few minutes left. In fact, we've just touched 5:30 Dubai time, which is the closing time. But Sohrab, do you want to add anything as a last note? I don't see any more questions, and then we can wrap up.
I guess in a way to answer your question and Virangana's at the same time, I wouldn't really look at it as resistance in my work and then, you know, opening it up to other things. But it was more, I think, I realized that it was escaping in some ways, and I thought that I was trying to resist, but in a way I realized the performance within what I was doing. When I recognized it, I realized that actually I was, in a way, escaping and protecting my own self, you know, in terms of how I end up photographing, like Life is Elsewhere, for example, my first work where I was looking at home. And then, you know, when I did start working with the Anjali House children, which Katrin and Sean both here have also, who they've worked with, I think that's when I realized that one could actually shed a certain baggage. So I feel like I was quite embarrassed actually of photographing at home. You know, I was a bit scared in terms of how one would see it, and even the notation that I've made, which is now below Zainab's, where it goes from my grandfather and photographs made by him of my grandmother, and of going on to my father, him becoming the photographer in the family, photographing you know, me when I was a kid, my mom, and so on. And then finally me becoming the photographer in some ways. I feel like somehow, you know, every family at some point has had this one photographer, you know, a designated photographer. And it's a strange thing because my grandmother passed just about 10 days ago. And I was asked to come and photograph for the family. So the day the body was brought in, and I was being very awkward about it. I didn't know what to do, because now you're thinking in terms of what one should do and should not do. And then I had all my relatives who were like, take with the face also, and it was like this sort of a dead face, which was very ugly. And I don't mean ugly in that sense. I mean, not what one expects to be beautified, because I also think that some of family albums have also been projections for so long, aspirational projections. This is who we want to be. Every family album somehow is a beautiful family album of a certain cherished memory, and memory itself is constructed. So I don't really know whether a family album is really real or not. And somehow at some point, it was a bit of a strange experience, because the closest work to me is, look, it's getting sunny outside, when I'm revisiting home and I'm photographing color, photographing with much closer distance, with an attempt to confront more, like what Bunu is also trying to do, in a work, a certain reality which I felt I was escaping from. And those are the kind of thought processes that were coming up in terms of confronting, shedding that baggage of. And here my relatives themselves, I don't know whether it's because of Instagram and a certain proliferation of images where, I mean, if you go to Banaras, on the side, you have these two photo studios. They specialize in photographing dead bodies, because in the end, for the family, that becomes, I think everyone's worried about, like Sean was talking about, withering as physically and changing and dying out. In some ways, I think I realized that if I'm showing photographs in party, the relationship that people have, like they will come, whenever I've shown works there, people will not really look at the photography or whatever. They will, it's a mark of identity. They will be going to each little speck in the horizon, someone, who they can recognize, and they will be saying, this is that person who is part of the Sangathan, that person's, sister's husband, or, so in a way, I think, or even if there's no, like people don't have many belongings, but there might still be a family photograph where they're posing in a certain way, wearing the best clothes that they have, combing the hair. It's I think the best version of themselves in some ways, so I feel it's sort of like the tip of the iceberg. And I feel that my realization with the family in some ways was also to, in a way, dig out the dirt in some ways, which is very hard. But what I realized was also that whenever I was digging out that dirt in terms of those images, when someone was encountering them, and I would be worried in terms of, they would be saying, this is really dirty, but actually they would say, my mother is also going through this, or my, uncle is going through this, or my closest friend, or I'm going through this. And what I realized was that somehow we all living in these dirty spaces, we all in a way, because of a certain image construct of society, we are in a way putting forward the best versions of ourselves. And it's a beautiful thing, but I also feel like people are very aware of what they're not showing, and when they're able to kind of touch that. So for someone, for example, for Sean to say something like, my parents have, they haven't touched each other. It's funny, but I think I remember when I was growing up, I made myself believe that my parents had sex once they had me, and somehow they didn't touch each other, because I was also growing up in a certain part of society where my parents were like these pure figures, so this element of touch, something dirty, which is all relative, changing. I think somehow, whatever Sean has said, maybe there are many other people looking at the work who can connect to something as simple as physical touch between parents, a certain bond which one assumes very often from a distance, that is not so sort of non-physical in that sense. So just that, and just to also put it over here, that in some ways, what Katrin is doing, I think, has been a very generous process, because it's a very difficult process. Because I don't know whether she's gone through it, but from a distance, I feel that photographers, image makers are always talking about copyright and always talking about, this is my image. And somehow for them to have mixed up and not it being very clear in terms of whose image it is, for me, from a distance, it's a very generous process, So it's not really that the generosity has come out of a difficult space, which I feel, exists.
Thank you, Sohrab. But I think let's end on that note. It's beautiful the way you also narrated your own approach to difference. I think where I was coming on difference was the kind of oppressive sort of expectation that gets created, that everything has to comply to sameness, that if it's not the same, and how does one befriend the other? How does one befriend the stranger? How does one befriend someone who has so far estranged them? And somewhere there's a political stance in one's commitment to difference then, which I think is expressed in everything all of you have said, that it is Bunu having her mother come see this, and her mother having a difficult time accepting, but then there is this space which does allow. And as Sean put it, that one realizes increasingly that spending more time with people, that there are endless opportunities of not being mean and terrible to other people. But on that note, thank you all very much. This is only the third of the 6 transformations. We have crossed by 10 minutes, and sorry to everyone who might have had other commitments. We're going to have the 4th transformation tomorrow, same time, a virtual tour of it with 4 other artists: Farah Mullah, Nida Mehboob, Pratik Sarkar, and Ritu Sattar. Pratik, who is a collaborator, Katrin, today, we'll hear from him tomorrow. But we're really going to be talking about peaks, amplifications and heightened senses. And I think some of those things will inevitably connect to today's conversation as well. So thank you all very much. Tune in tomorrow to another shift, and look forward to keeping in touch. Those who are in Dubai, the exhibition is open every day. Keep in touch. Take care. Thank you. Yes, Sean.
Bye.
Bye.
Right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.